In the dead of winter, 1839, two American states stood on the brink of war. Militias were raised. Weapons were gathered. Governors traded threats across state lines. And the cause of this looming conflict? Not gold, not valuable minerals, not some grand ideology. It was honey. This bizarre episode in American history became known as the Honey War, a bloodless but very real standoff between Missouri and the Iowa Territory. It's a story that sounds like a tall tale, but it exposed just how fragile borders were on the American frontier and how easily simple misunderstandings could spiral out of control. Today, it's remembered as a quirky footnote, but at the time, it was deadly serious. To understand how the United States nearly fought itself over beehives, we need to go back to the chaotic early days of American expansion. After the American Revolution, the United States grew at an incredible pace. New territories were carved out and states were admitted faster than the government could accurately map them. Surveying land in the early 19th century was slow, imprecise, and often confusing. Surveyors had to rely on inaccurate compasses, rough astronomical calculations, and natural landmarks like rivers, trees, or rock formations. The problem was, these landmarks could shift, disappear, or be misidentified over time. As a result, many state boundaries were vague, poorly documented, or outright contradicted by different maps. This was especially true in frontier regions like the Upper Midwest, where Missouri and the new Iowa Territory shared a long, largely unsettled border that was about to become a major headache. Missouri became a state in 1821, and its northern boundary was defined using language that sounded precise, but really wasn't. The border was supposed to run east from a point on the Missouri River all the way to the rapids of the Des Moines River. That single phrase caused enormous confusion. Why? Because nobody could agree on what the rapids of the Des Moines River actually were. Some believed it referred to rapids on the Des Moines River itself. Others argued it meant the rapids on the much larger Mississippi River, right where the Des Moines entered into it. An early surveyor named John C. Sullivan had tried to mark the boundary back in 1816, drawing what became known as the Sullivan Line. For a while, Missouri accepted this line, but later surveys suggested Sullivan had placed it too far north. This small discrepancy would eventually put thousands of acres of valuable land, and the people living on it, into dispute. Then, in 1838, the Iowa Territory was officially created. Suddenly, Missouri's vague northern boundary became Iowa's southern border, and that old surveying problem became a new political crisis. The land in question was prime frontier territory. It had rich soil, timber, plenty of game, and a growing number of settlers. Both Missouri and Iowa claimed jurisdiction over the same strip of land, a piece of territory roughly 9 miles wide and over 200 miles long. Imagine being a settler living there. You wouldn't know which government you were supposed to obey, which laws to follow, or who you should pay your taxes to. That uncertainty was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And that spark was about to be lit. In the late 1830s, Missouri officials decided to assert their control over the disputed strip once and for all. They sent county tax collectors northward to demand taxes from the settlers living there. As you can imagine, Iowa authorities were not happy. From their perspective, Missouri was trying to illegally tax Iowan citizens. Things escalated quickly. Iowa officials started arresting the Missouri tax collectors, charging them with trespassing and illegal taxation. Missouri responded furiously. The governor accused Iowa of kidnapping state officials and violating Missouri's sovereignty. The rhetoric got heated, and both sides began preparing for the very real possibility of armed conflict. Sheriffs became adversaries, and neighbors started eyeing each other with suspicion. But the conflict got its very memorable name from one, strangely specific event. While trying to enforce their authority, Missouri officials cut down several valuable bee trees belonging to settlers in the disputed zone. On the American frontier, wild honey was a crucial resource. It was one of the main sweeteners available. It could be sold or traded for other goods, and the trees that housed the bees were considered private property. When Missouri officials chopped them down and reportedly took the honey, the settlers were furious. This wasn't just a legal debate about taxes anymore. To them, this was theft. It was personal. Word spread like wildfire, and what had been a dry legal dispute now had a face, a story, and a name: the Honey War. By December of 1839, the situation had become explosive. Missouri's governor, Lilburn Boggs, called up the state militia, authorizing thousands of men to prepare for action. In response, the governor of the Iowa Territory, Robert Lucas, mobilized his own militia. At the peak of the tension, Over 1,200 Missouri militiamen were ready to march, and hundreds of Iowans had gathered to defend their territory. They drilled, they camped, and they waited along the disputed border. Yet, despite these dramatic preparations, it seems that neither side truly wanted bloodshed. Reports from the time say that many of the militia members who showed up were poorly equipped, some carrying farm tools instead of weapons. They seemed more curious than hostile. The tension was very real, but so was the underlying sense of absurdity. So, how did this war over honey not turn violent? Several factors helped de-escalate the crisis. First, the harsh winter weather made any large-scale military movement incredibly difficult. Second, local leaders on both sides began to realize just how ridiculous the situation had become. Cooler heads started to prevail. And third, the federal government finally stepped in. President Martin Van Buren's administration urged both sides to calm down and encouraged them to seek a legal resolution through the courts instead of on a battlefield. Eventually, the militias stood down. No shots were fired. No one was hurt. The honey war ended not with a bang, but with paperwork. The dispute, however, was far from over. The border question lingered in legal limbo for years. Finally, in 1849, a full decade after the militias faced off, the case reached the U-South Supreme Court. After reviewing all the old maps and surveys, the court issued its ruling. It sided with the original Sullivan Line, confirming it as Missouri's true northern boundary. This meant the disputed strip of land officially belonged to Iowa, not Missouri. By this time, Iowa had become a state, and both sides were more than ready to put the embarrassing episode behind them. The border was finally settled, and the farmers in the disputed territory at last knew for certain which state they belonged to. The honey war might sound like a historical joke, but it actually reveals some important truths about American history. It shows just how fragile and uncertain the country's internal borders were in its early years. It is a powerful example of how quickly misunderstandings and local pride could escalate into a major crisis. It also highlights the constant friction between state power and federal authority, and how ordinary settlers were often caught in the middle of these larger political battles. Most importantly, it demonstrated the crucial role of the Supreme Court in peacefully resolving internal disputes. Without that legal framework, the outcome could have been far more violent. So today, the honey war is mostly remembered with a bit of a chuckle. But back in 1839, it was a genuine crisis that brought two American states to the very edge of armed conflict. It is a great reminder that history isn't always shaped by grand battles or famous generals. Sometimes, the course of events can turn on something as simple as a bad map, a few ambiguous words in a legal document, a dose of local pride, and a handful of stolen beehives. The honey war stands as one of the strangest but most telling conflicts in American history, and that's what makes it so fascinating and worth remembering. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more hidden stories from the past.